the afternoon, and he said, and he threw me a curveball and he said, I have an assignment for you, my favorite uncle. He was trying to butter me up, of course. I said, what do you want me to do now? He says, you're going to do the eulogy. I said, what? Thanks for giving me at least a day to prepare something. So anyway, here I am. Bear with me as I try to give you a little bit about the life of Pepa Josefina Gonzales. First thing I want to say is, we should not be mourning. We should not be mourning the passing away of Pepa. We instead should be celebrating that God gave her 103 years of life. 103 years. Now, what is better than that? I'm sure that Pepa would not want us to mourn, nor to shed any tears, nor to grieve. She wants us to be like her, stoic. I call my Pepa stoic, because if you knew her, whenever she suffered through anything, she didn't cry, she didn't say anything, she just kept quiet and suffered silently. Someone once said that parents should not have to bury their children. But unfortunately, Pepa buried 3 of her children. Little Eddie Jr., Little Eddie, Sylvia, and Gloria. And of course, she buried her husband, Robert. Can you imagine 103 years of life? Do any of you know anyone else, personally, that lived 103 years? Let me give you an idea of what 103 years of life is. Pepa was born in 1912. She lived through World War I. She lived through the 1920s, known as the Roaring Twenties, the age of the flappers. She lived through the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the war in Afghanistan, and all the current turmoil going on right now. She lived through 15 presidencies. Can you imagine? Woodrow Wilson, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George H. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. Who can top that? Like I said, Pepa was born in 1912 in Esmeralda, Texas. Our dad was 17, my mom was 15 when they came to the United States with Natalia, our firstborn, our first sister, crossing the border into Texas. They fled from Chihuahua, Mexico during the Mexican Revolution of 1910. There was Emiliano Zapata, Pancho Villa, and all those other generals running around Mexico during the revolution. And as they went around the country, they were conscripting the young men into their various armies. Most of the peasant men didn't even know what they were fighting about. So many of them fled to the United States. And that's where my mom and dad and many of our relatives came to the United States to get away from that Mexican Revolution. During the first years, they lived 1 year in Texas, then they moved to Boyle Heights, where the rest of the Tirones children were born. Lupe, Nora, Ralph, Mike, Rico, Mo, Lola, Richard, Sally, Raymond. 12 of us. During the few years that they came in Boyle Heights, they lived in various locations on Anderson, Utah, 2nd Street, before residing at that famous address 1718 East 3rd Street. Pepa went to 2nd Street Elementary School, Hollenbeck Junior High School, and Roosevelt High School until the 10th grade. Go Rough Riders. In the 10th grade, she had to drop out of school, and then she started working at the Queen of Angels Hospital in the housekeeping department, along with Kuka, our aunt, and Lupi, her sister. Pepa married Robert in 1931 at the Anthony's Catholic Church in Boyle Heights. She was 19, Robert was 20. They lived for a few years on Gles Street, Pecan Street, McAllister. Remember those streets, everybody? And a few years in the back house on Breed Street until we had to sell that house because that famous Freeway 5 came through and bought us out. Then they moved to a house in Norwalk in 1952 after the sale of the house on Breed Street. They moved to their final residence on Hillview in 1957. After the death of Robert on April 26, 1991, Pepa lived alone until she moved to Hollenbeck Residential Living in 1994, and it was there that she silently passed away. Over the married years, they had 4 children. Little Eddie, 1936, who passed away from a ruptured appendix in 1939. Robert Dodo, 1932. Gloria, 1933, who passed away in 1996. And Sylvia, in 1940, who passed away in 2012. From their children, Robert and Pepa had several grandchildren. I think it was 9. Am I correct? Or was it 9? Robert Dodo and his first wife Gloria had 2 sons, Dennis, Paul, and Dennis. Gloria and Don Leonhard had 2 children, Catherine and Christopher. Sylvia and her first husband, Lloyd Willett, had 5 children, Leslie, Callie, Keith, Craig, and Melissa. Later, after passing away of Dodo's wife, Ophelia, he married Gloria, and Sylvia later married Glenn Home. Now that we have a brief history of Pepa's life, let me tell you about some of the things that Pepa told me she remembered the most in her life. Number 1, she remembered the great time she had with the A and B baseball team, in which many of our people present here played. Robert, Dodo, Mo, Mike, Ralph, Manuel, and Joe Galvin all played on that team. And the rest of us followed them wherever they went all over town. The whole family would go to the games. We would ride in a big panel truck, like we enclosed. We didn't know where we were going. A truck belonging to A and B. She said she really remembered these baseball games because after every game, one of the sisters or whoever had a house would host a barbecue. And all the family would get together after the games. And she really enjoyed that. She remembered the great family time she had listening to our father, who maybe you don't know this, he used to play the tuba and the guitar at La Placita. And my mother used to sing. She remembered going to visit relatives in Colton and in East Highland. Among them, Mom's cousin, Lupe Canales. She remembered visits to Pacoima. You know Pacoima? It's not called Pacoima anymore. Again, to visit relatives, including cousin Jose Terrones. She remembered the various relatives who lived with the family on 1718 East 3rd Street. At 1718, at one time or the other, lived our Uncle Ponciano, our Aunt Cuca, our cousin Jose Terrones, and several others. I think my mom and dad were running an underground railroad for Mexican immigrants. She remembered the many festivities activities that we had at Brownson House at St. Anthony's Catholic Church in Boyle Heights. There, my mother and Doña Petra used to dance Indian dances. My mother would make these beautiful Indian costumes. The one I remember was a red one with little bamboos and little bells on it. And they would dance these Indian dances there. I don't know what tribe, but they would dance. She remembers spending time at the International Institute on Boyle Heights. Some of you probably know that place, International Institute. She said she didn't remember, or didn't want to remember, the party on Arizona Street where the three musketeers, Pepa, Nora, and Luby, had a few too many screwdrivers. And before you know it, they went clunk, and we had to carry them all, and we laid them side by side.